She had $19 in her checking account, 5 days to prove she could keep her daughter, and a certified letter in her hand from a dead man she'd only met twice. Maren Holloway sat in the cab of her late grandfather's rust-bitten Ford F-150, parked outside the post office in Cleveland, Ohio, while the November rain hammered the windshield like a fist demanding to be let in. In the passenger seat, 11-year-old Wren clutched a faded rag doll and stared at her mother with the quiet, watchful eyes of a child who had learned too young that grown-ups break. The letter was thin, almost weightless. Inside a brass key worn smooth by decades of pockets, a deed to 4 acres of junked cars on the outskirts of Detroit, and a handwritten note in shaky cursive. Granddaughter, I've waited 30 years for a Holloway brave enough to finish what your father started. Go to the salvage yard. Find the red 1986 Buick LeSabre. Open the trunk. What you find will either save you or bury you both. Choose wisely. They killed your father for less. Silas. Maren's hands began to shake. Her father had died in a car accident in 1995. That's what her mother had sworn for 30 years. Apparently, her mother had been lying. She had $19 in her checking account, 5 days to prove she could keep her daughter, and a certified letter in her hand from a dead man she'd only met twice. Maren Holloway sat in the cab of her late grandfather's rust-bitten Ford F-150, parked outside the post office in Cleveland, Ohio, while the November rain hammered the windshield like a fist demanding to be let in. In the passenger seat, 11-year-old Wren clutched a faded rag doll and stared at her mother with the quiet, watchful eyes of a child who had learned too young that grown-ups break. The letter was thin, almost weightless. Inside a brass key worn smooth by decades of pockets, a deed to 4 acres of junked cars on the outskirts of Detroit, and a handwritten note in shaky cursive. Granddaughter, it began. I've waited 30 years for a Holloway brave enough to finish what your father started. Go to the salvage yard. Find the red 1986 Buick LeSabre. Open the trunk. What you find will either save you or bury you both. Choose wisely. They killed your father for less. It was signed simply Silas. Maren's hands began to shake. Her father had died in a car accident on Interstate 94 in 1995. She had been 7 years old. She remembered the casket. She remembered her mother's face, the way it had folded inward like wet paper. She remembered the closed casket service, the priest's careful words, the way her mother had said over and over for 30 years, "Your father drove too fast." "Sweetheart, your father was reckless. Your father didn't know what he was doing." Apparently, her mother had been lying. Maren folded the letter with trembling fingers and slid it back into the envelope. She looked at her daughter. Wren had her father's eyes sharp and curious, but she had Maren's stubborn jaw, and right now, that jaw was set in the way it set when Wren was trying very hard not to cry. "Mom," Wren said quietly, "are we going to be okay?" Maren wanted to lie. She wanted to promise the way mothers are supposed to promise, but she had spent 12 years working in a shipyard welding seams onto cargo vessels on Lake Erie, and welders don't lie to themselves about cracks. You see them, you fix them, or you let the whole hull sink. "I don't know yet, baby," Marin said, "but I'm working on it." She had been working on it for 8 months, ever since the Great Lakes Maritime Yard had closed and 312 workers had been handed their final checks and a pamphlet about retraining grants that didn't exist. She had been one of 17 women on the welding floor. She had outlasted most of the men. She had earned her certifications, her steady hand, her name on the union roster. And then the contracts dried up, and the yard sold the land to a developer. And Marin Holloway found herself 38 years old broke and 45 days behind on rent. Her ex-husband, Trevor Ashcroft, had noticed. Trevor was a software engineer who lived in a 4-bedroom colonial in Shaker Heights with his new wife, a pediatric dentist named Caroline, who had a Pilates instructor and a Range Rover, and a swimming pool with a heated diving well. Trevor's lawyer had filed for full custody 3 weeks ago, citing housing instability and inadequate financial provision. The hearing was Friday. It was Sunday afternoon. Marin had 5 days. She looked at the deed in her hand. Holloway Auto Salvage. 4 acres of dirt and rust on the eastern edge of Detroit, 3 hours away. She had not seen the property in her life. She had not seen the man who owned it since she was 4 years old. She tried to remember Silas Holloway and could only summon 2 images. A tall, narrow man standing on a porch in winter, holding a coffee mug, watching her father carry her down a set of icy steps. And a Christmas card, years later, when she was 9, after her father was dead. The card had a deer on it, and inside, in the same shaky handwriting, it had said, "Only, I am sorry. Love, your grandfather." Her mother had thrown it in the kitchen trash. Now Silas was dead too. The lawyer's letter had said he passed in early October. Pancreatic cancer. He had left her everything he owned. Marin turned the key in the ignition. The F-150 coughed, sputtered, and caught. She put the truck in gear. "Where are we going?" Wren asked. "Detroit," Marin said. Wren did not ask why. She had learned over the past 8 months that her mother was a woman who moved when she needed to move and asked questions later. It was a skill Wren had inherited. They drove west on Interstate 90, the rain following them across the Ohio line into Michigan, the windshield wipers slapping out a rhythm like a tired heartbeat. Marin had $240 in cash hidden inside an old toolbox in the truck bed, the last of her savings. She had a tank and a half of gas. She had a daughter who was hungry and a custody hearing in 5 days and a deed to a junkyard owned by a man she did not know. Somewhere east of Toledo, Wren spoke. "Mom," she said, "Tony's mom told me Trevor's house has a pool." Marin's hands tightened on the wheel. Tony's mother was Caroline's best friend. She had been feeding Wren a slow drip of poison for months, the kind that wears down a child's faith in the parent who can't afford the things the other parent can. "I know," Marin said. She said I could swim every day in the summer. She said Caroline already has my room decorated. I know, baby. Wren was quiet for a long mile. Then she turned in her seat, looked straight at her mother, and said something that broke the thing inside Marin that had been holding her together. Mom, Wren said, I don't want a pool. I just want you. Marin pulled the truck onto the shoulder of the highway. She put it in park. She covered her face with her hands, and for the first time in 8 months, she let her daughter see her cry. Wren reached across the console and held her mother's wrist with both small hands. We're going to be okay, Wren whispered, repeating the words Marin had told her 1,000 times. We always figure it out. When Marin could breathe again, she wiped her face on the sleeve of her flannel shirt, put the truck in gear, and kept driving. The light was going gray by the time they crossed into Detroit, and the city looked like a place that had been promised something and then forgotten. They drove east through neighborhoods of boarded houses and chain-link fences, and weed-cracked sidewalks past a closed steel mill the size of 3 football fields, past an abandoned middle school with its windows broken out like missing teeth. The GPS led them past the city limits into a stretch of industrial land along the river. Warehouses, truck depots, a scrapyard with a crane that looked like a skeleton against the sky. And then, at the end of a long dirt road, bordered by overgrown sumac, a sign. Holloway Auto Salvage, Estin. 1985. No trespassing. Marin stopped the truck. The yard was bigger than she had imagined. Acres of stacked car bodies rose behind a tall chain-link fence, 3 rows deep, 4 cars high in some places, a city of dead metal in every shade of rust and faded paint. A double-wide office trailer sat just inside the gate lights, off looking unloved. But the gate itself was padlocked, and the padlock was new. Marin got out, climbed the fence to reach the chain, and tried her brass key. It fit. The lock fell open. She swung the gate aside, drove the F-150 through, and closed it behind them. Wren was already out of the truck, looking at the rows of cars with the kind of fascination that only children can summon for ruined things. Marin found another key on the ring that fit the trailer door. She pushed it open. The smell that came out was not what she expected. She had braced for mildew for animal droppings for the wet rot of an abandoned space. Instead, she smelled coffee. Old coffee hours, dead in a pot, but coffee. And lemon furniture polish. And the faint trace of pipe tobacco. She found the light switch. A row of overhead fluorescents flickered to life. The inside of the trailer was clean. Not just clean, lived in. There was a small kitchenette with a coffee pot on the warmer half full. The carafe cool to the touch, but the coffee still smelling faintly of cinnamon. There was a desk with 3 neat stacks of paperwork. There was a leather chair by a small wood stove. There was a single bed made up tight against the far wall, military corners, a folded wool blanket at the foot. Wool. And on the wall above the desk, in a frame, was a Detroit Police Department patrol officer's badge. Number 4471. Tarnished at the edges, polished in the center. Below the badge, a brass plaque. Sergeant Silas J. Holloway, 1968-1989. Detroit Police Department, 21 years of honorable service. Marin stared at the plaque for a long time. Her grandfather had been a cop. Her mother had never told her. Not once. In 38 years. She heard Wren step inside behind her, heard the soft intake of breath as the girl saw the badge. "Mom," Wren whispered. "Was he a policeman?" "Apparently," Marin said. "Apparently he was." She walked to the desk. On the top stack was a manila envelope with her name on it. Marin Holloway, written in the same shaky cursive as the letter. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A list typed and laminated of 3 things. 1. Find the red 1986 Buick LeSabre, northeast corner of the yard, 3rd row from the back. 2. Open the trunk. Lift the rubber mat. 3. Whatever you find, do not under any circumstances tell another living soul until you've read the journal. Marin folded the list. She looked at her daughter. "Wren," she said, "I need you to stay in the trailer. I need to go look at something." "I want to come." "I know, but I need 5 minutes by myself first." "Okay." Wren nodded the way she nodded when she understood more than she was supposed to. Marin took a flashlight from a hook by the door. She stepped outside. The November dusk had thickened into something closer to night, and the yard was full of long shadows that did not belong to anything she could name. She walked. The northeast corner of the yard was the oldest section. The cars there had been stacked the longest, their tires gone flat, their windows starred with cracks, their bodies fused together by rust and years. She walked past a 1978 Lincoln, a 1981 Chevrolet pickup with no doors, a 1975 Ford station wagon with weeds growing up through its engine bay, and there, in the 3rd row from the back, sat the red 1986 Buick LeSabre. The paint was faded almost to pink in places. The chrome trim was pitted, but the car was unmistakable. A 4-door sedan, full-size, the kind of car a man might have driven to a precinct in 1986 and parked in a lot full of others just like it. A cop's car, a working man's car. Marin walked around it slowly. The driver's door was unlocked. She tried the trunk. The trunk released with a soft, mechanical groan. She lifted it open. The trunk was empty. A rubber floor mat cracked with age. A spare tire well cover. A musty smell. She lifted the mat. Underneath, bolted into the floor of the trunk, was a steel safe. Small. Maybe 18 inches square. Painted black, the paint scratched away in places to show the gray metal beneath. A combination dial in the center brass and worn. There was a piece of masking tape stuck to the top of the safe. In her grandfather's cursive 4 digits, November 22nd, 87. Marin stared at the date, November 22nd, 1987. It meant nothing to her. She spun the dial. 11 left, 22 right, 87 left. She pulled the handle. The safe opened. Inside, packed tight, were 6 items. A leather-bound journal, the cover soft and dark with age. A list of 47 vehicle identification numbers typed on yellowed paper dated 1985 through 2015. A small plastic case containing 7 rolls of microfilm. A bundle of cash banded in $50,000 straps. She counted with her thumb. 1 bundle, $50,000 in hundreds. A Smith & Wesson Model 36 revolver, oiled and loaded with a box of 50 rounds beside it. And a leather card holder containing a single laminated card. A Detroit Police Department detective's identification in her grandfather's name. Below it, a smaller card. A Union card from the Fraternal Order of Police, paid through the year of his death. Marin stood in the open trunk of a 1986 Buick LeSabre and felt the entire shape of her life rearrange itself. Her grandfather had not been a drunk. Her grandfather had not been a deadbeat. Her grandfather had been a Detroit police sergeant for 21 years. He had retired in 1989. He had opened this salvage yard, and somewhere along the way, he had started keeping a secret in a safe bolted into the trunk of a car nobody would ever think to look in. And he had wanted her to find it. She gathered everything into a canvas tool bag she had brought from the truck. She closed the trunk. She walked back through the yard, in the deepening dark, the weight of the bag heavy on her shoulder. In the trailer, Wren was sitting at the desk, swinging her feet, reading a paperback book she had found on a shelf. She looked up when Marin came in. "Did you find something?" Wren asked. "Yes," Marin said. She set the bag on the desk. She looked at her daughter, and she made a decision that she would, in the weeks to come, wonder if she should have made differently. She decided to tell Wren the truth. Because Wren had asked her on the highway to just be her mother. And being her mother meant not building a wall of lies the way Marin's own mother had built one. "Wren," Marin said, "your great-grandfather left some things for us, important things. I don't know what they all mean yet, but I'm going to find out." Wren nodded solemnly. "Can I help?" "Yes," Marin said, "but first I have to read." She took the journal out of the bag. She sat in the leather chair by the cold wood stove. She opened the journal to the first page. The first entry was dated July 14th, 1985. "My name is Silas Joseph Holloway," it began. "I am 37 years old. I was a Detroit police sergeant for 21 years. I retired 6 weeks ago. Today, 2 men came to see me at the salvage yard. They drove a black Lincoln Continental. The taller one called himself Mr. Moretti. He said he had a business proposition. He said he needed a quiet place where certain vehicles could disappear. He said he would pay me $5,000 per car. He said if I refused, my son Caleb, who lives in Cleveland with his pregnant wife, would suffer a tragedy. He named the hospital where my daughter-in-law was scheduled to give birth. He named my son's employer. He smiled the entire time. I told him I would think about it. He said he would come back in 72 hours. After he left, I sat in this trailer and cried for the first time since my wife died in 1981. I have been a police officer my entire adult life. I have arrested men like this. I have testified against men like this. I have buried partners who died trying to put men like this away. And now one of them is going to use my unborn granddaughter as leverage to make me a criminal. I do not know what I am going to do, but I know I am not going to forget. I am going to write down every word, every face, every license plate. If I am going to be his accomplice, I am going to be his witness too. Maren stopped reading. She set the journal in her lap. Outside, the wind was rising, and somewhere in the rows of dead cars, something metal was rattling against itself. Wren had crept onto the arm of the chair and was reading over her mother's shoulder, her small face very still. "Mom," Wren said quietly, "was great-grandpa a bad guy?" Maren put her arm around her daughter and pulled her close. "No, baby," she said. "I don't think he was. I think he was a man who got trapped. And I think he spent the rest of his life finding a way out." She kept reading. The journal entries spanned 30 years. Silas Holloway had agreed to Moretti's terms on the 4th day. He had ground 47 vehicles into scrap between 1985 and 2015. He had been paid $235,000 in total. He had never spent a dollar of it. The cash in the safe was the last installment untouched since 2015, but he had also done something else. Every car, every time. He had recorded the VIN number. He had photographed the interior before it went to the crusher. He had logged the date, the time, the men who delivered it, the make and model of the vehicle they drove away in. He had built a paper trail so meticulous that Maren, even skimming, could feel the years of rage and careful hate that had gone into it. And early on, he had identified a name. The Moretti family. Vincenzo Moretti, the older brother, the boss. Salvatore Moretti, the younger brother, the enforcer. A cousin named Bruno, who handled logistics. An attorney named Calloway, who handled the offshore accounts. The journal named senators. The journal named judges. The journal named a young state representative from Western Michigan named Harlan Brennan, who in 1991 had been photographed accepting an envelope from Vincenzo Moretti in the parking lot of a restaurant in Greektown. Maren turned to a page near the back and her breath stopped. The entry was dated May 3rd, 1995. "Caleb came to see me today," Silas had written. "My son drove up from Cleveland alone. He brought a copy of a ledger I have been keeping. I do not know how he found it. I had hidden it in the rafters of the trailer. He must have searched the place while I was at the dentist last month. He told me he is going to the FBI. He said he can no longer live in a country where men like Moretti walk free, and his own father is forced to help them. I begged him to wait. I told him about the threats. I told him about his daughter. He looked at me and he said, "Dad, if I don't do this, what kind of country am I leaving my little Marin?" I could not answer him. I have not been able to answer him for 30 years. The next entry was dated June 18th, 1995. My son is dead. Single car accident on Interstate 94, 3 miles east of the Toledo exit. The state troopers say his gas tank ruptured. The state troopers say he was driving too fast. I drove down to identify the body. There was not enough left of him to identify. I knew before they told me. I knew the day I heard he had not arrived at the FBI field office in Cleveland for his scheduled meeting. He had told me the date. He had told me the time. The Moretti family also knew the date. I do not know who told them, but I know what they did, and I know I will spend the rest of my life making them pay for it. Marin closed the journal. She sat in the leather chair in the trailer in the salvage yard in the eastern outskirts of Detroit, and she understood finally why her mother had lied for 30 years. Her mother had been protecting her. Her father had been murdered. Her grandfather had spent the next 30 years collecting the evidence that would prove it. And he had waited and waited and waited until he was dying to leave it to her. Wren had fallen asleep against her shoulder. The girl was warm and heavy and smelled faintly of the cherry shampoo Marin bought at the dollar store. Marin did not move. She let her daughter sleep. She watched the cold wood stove and listened to the wind outside and thought about her father, 28 years old, the age she had been when she had given birth to Wren, standing in this trailer in 1995, telling his father that he could not raise his daughter in a country where evil won. The first gray of dawn was in the eastern window when she heard the sound of tires on gravel. A vehicle, slow, approaching the gate. Marin set Wren gently on the leather chair. She covered her with the wool blanket from the bed. She took the Smith & Wesson revolver from the canvas bag, checked the cylinder, and slipped it into the waistband of her jeans behind her back, beneath the flannel shirt. She walked outside. The vehicle was a tan Buick Regal, easily 20 years old, idling at the gate. The driver was alone. An older man, heavyset, wearing a dark windbreaker. He held both hands flat against the steering wheel, where she could see them. He rolled down the window. "You'd be Caleb's daughter," he said. His voice was a low rasp, like a man who had once smoked and then quit too late. Marin did not answer. "I'm not here to hurt you," the man said. "Your grandfather told me to come if he died, and you came to the yard. He said you might be here within a month. He was off by about 3 weeks. "Who are you?" "Roderick Bellamy," the man said. "Retired detective, Detroit Police 3rd Precinct. Your grandfather and I worked together for 14 years. I was at his funeral. I would have called you, but he didn't want me to. He said you'd come on your own time.
Myron studied him. The man was 68, maybe 70. His face was a road map of broken capillaries and old sun damage. His eyes were watery but steady. He had the careful, contained posture of a man who had spent a lifetime watching exits. She did not lower her guard, but she opened the gate. He drove the Buick through, parked it beside her F-150, and got out slowly. His knees hurt. She could see it. He was wearing scuffed leather Oxfords that had been polished sometime in the last week, and rubber-soled the way old cops wear their shoes. "Your grandfather gave me something to give you," he said. He reached into the pocket of his windbreaker very slowly, watching her face, and pulled out a small object. It was a flip phone, old, the kind nobody made anymore. The screen was scratched. The hinge was worn smooth. "He charged it the day before he died," Roderick said. "He said when you got here, I should give it to you. He said it would ring within 48 hours of you opening the gate. He said when it does, you'll need to know what you're hearing." He held it out. Marin took it. It was warm from his pocket. The screen was dark, but a green light blinked steadily at the corner. Powered on, waiting. "How long has it been charged?" she asked. 5 weeks. He set up the battery saver. It can sit for months on standby. "And it's going to ring." "It's going to ring." She looked at him. "Mr. Bellamy."
"Rod, please." "Rod, who's going to be on the other end?"
He was quiet for a long moment. He looked past her at the rows of stacked cars at the trailer where her daughter was sleeping at the gray Detroit sky, just starting to take on color. "Vincenzo Moretti," he said. "He's 85. He's dying of congestive heart failure. He's been waiting for your grandfather to die so he could call this number. Silas knew it. He left you the phone because he wanted you to hear what the man sounds like before you decide what to do." The phone, as if on cue, began to vibrate in her hand. The screen lit up. A single line of text appeared above the call icon. No caller ID. Marin looked at Rod Bellamy. Rod nodded once slowly. She flipped the phone open and held it to her ear. The voice that came through the speaker was old and refined and patient. The voice of a man who had given orders for 60 years and had never once raised it to do so. "Miss Holloway," the voice said, "my condolences on the loss of your grandfather. He was a stubborn man. I had hoped his death might bring our long association to a peaceful close. But I see from the open gate behind you that you have already chosen to involve yourself in matters that do not concern you." Marin said nothing. "I am going to be very direct," the voice continued. "I am willing to purchase the salvage yard from you for $750,000. Cash. Delivered within 48 hours. The deed will be transferred to a third party of my choosing. You and your daughter will return to Cleveland. You will solve your housing problem. You will keep your daughter. Your custody hearing is Friday, I believe. At 2 o'clock. Judge Whitmore presiding. He is a thorough man. He likes to see receipts. With $750,000, you can show him a great many receipts. Marin's mouth had gone dry. "If you refuse," the voice said, "I will be forced to consider other measures. Wren is a lovely child." Lincoln Elementary, Mrs. Patterson's 5th grade class. She walks home most days down Maple Avenue. "I do not threaten children, Miss Holloway. I never have. But I cannot speak for everyone in my organization, and at my age, I find that the energy required to control my associates has become very tiring. 48 hours, Miss Holloway." The line went dead. Marin stood with the phone still pressed to her ear, the dial tone humming softly, while her grandfather's last sunrise broke over the Detroit skyline in the east. She closed the phone. She turned to Rod Bellamy. The old detective was watching her face the way a man watches a fuse burn. "He knew my daughter's school," Marin said. "He knew her teacher's name. He knew the route she walks home. He's known where she lived since the day she was born," Rod said quietly. "Your grandfather knew it too. That's why he never reached out. As long as he didn't acknowledge you, the family didn't acknowledge you. Now that he's dead and you've come to the yard, you are acknowledged." "What does that mean?" Rod looked at her for a long moment. His watery eyes were not unkind. "It means," he said, "you have 2 roads in front of you, Miss Holloway. One of them ends in $750,000 and a quiet life. The other one ends somewhere I cannot tell you, because the man who would have walked it with you is buried and the road has not been walked yet." Marin looked back at the trailer. Through the small window, she could see her daughter sleeping in the leather chair wrapped in the wool blanket, her dark hair fallen across her face. She thought of her father, 28 years old, standing in the same trailer, telling his father he could not raise his daughter in a country where evil won. She thought of her grandfather alone in this junkyard for 30 years, writing in a journal, photographing cars, building a paper trail no one had asked him to build because someone had to remember. She thought of her mother lying for 30 years to keep her safe, and she thought of the brass badge on the wall above the desk. Number 4471, Detroit Police Department, polished in the center, where her grandfather had touched it over and over for 30 years. "Rod," she said, "I need you to come inside. I need you to read what's in that journal. And then I need you to tell me everything you know about a man named Vincenzo Moretti." Rod Bellamy nodded. He followed her into the trailer. Behind them, the gate stood open to the Detroit dawn, and the November wind moved through the rows of dead cars, and somewhere in the 3rd row from the back, the trunk of a 1986 Buick LeSabre stood empty for the first time in 30 years. Inside the trailer, Marin turned on the coffee pot. She woke Wren gently. She introduced her daughter to the old man with the careful shoes and the watery eyes. "Sweetheart," Marin said, "this is Mr. Bellamy." He was your great-grandpa's friend. Wren studied the old man with the grave seriousness of an 11-year-old who had recently learned that the adults in her life had been keeping secrets. "Were you a policeman too?" Wren asked. Rod Bellamy smiled for the first time since Marin had met him. It was a smile that took 30 years off his face. "I was young lady," he said. "I was indeed." Marin poured 3 cups of coffee, one of them mostly milk, and set them on the desk. She opened the journal to the first page. She pushed it across to Rod. "Start here," she said. "Tell me what I'm looking at." Rod Bellamy put on a pair of reading glasses, took a slow sip of coffee, and began to read. Outside, the November sun cleared the horizon, and the long shadows of the stacked cars stretched west across the salvage yard, like the fingers of a hand reaching for something it had waited 30 years to grasp. Marin Holloway watched the old detective read, and she felt for the first time in 8 months that she was not alone. She was not safe. She was not anywhere close to safe, but she was not alone. And somewhere in the corner of her mind, where her father lived, a young man of 28 nodded once at his grown daughter, and the wind moved through the dead cars, and the work, at long last, began. Rod Bellamy read for 2 hours without speaking. Marin made him a second cup of coffee and then a third. She made Wren a bowl of oatmeal from a canister she found in the kitchenette cupboard. She watched the old detective turn the pages of her grandfather's journal with the slow, deliberate care of a man handling something both holy and radioactive. When he reached the entry dated June 18th, 1995, he stopped. His hands trembled just barely on the leather cover. He took off his reading glasses, folded them, and set them on the desk. He pinched the bridge of his nose between his thumb and forefinger, and he stayed that way for a long time. When he looked up at Marin, his watery eyes were wet for a different reason. "I knew," he said. His voice was a low rasp. "You knew what?" "I knew your father didn't die in an accident." Marin sat down in the chair across the desk from him. Wren had finished her oatmeal and was sitting cross-legged on the leather chair by the wood stove, pretending to read the paperback book she had found, listening to every word. "Tell me," Marin said. Rod Bellamy took a long, slow breath, the way a man breathes when he is about to lift something he has been carrying alone for too many years. "I was a homicide detective in the 3rd Precinct in 1995, he said. "Your father's accident was outside my jurisdiction on a state highway in Ohio. But when the report came across our wire, I read it because I knew Silas and I knew his boy. Your father had stopped by our precinct twice that spring, asking quiet questions about a federal task force on organized crime. Questions a civilian wouldn't ask unless he had a reason." He paused. He looked at Wren, then at Marin. "The accident report said his gas tank ruptured on impact. Single vehicle lost control on a wet road, struck a concrete embankment. But I read the trooper's photographs. I read the fire marshal's notes, and I saw something the report didn't mention." He stopped. "What did you see?" Marin asked. The blast pattern on the underside of the chassis was wrong. A gas tank rupture, even at high speed, burns upward and outward. It blackens the chassis in a cone shape. The fire marshal's photos showed concentrated charring on the driver's side fuel line 3 feet forward of the tank. That's not a rupture. That's an incendiary device, a small one. Just enough to ignite the fuel line and send the vehicle into a fireball. He shook his head slowly. I drove down to Toledo, off the books, on my own time. I tried to talk to the fire marshal who wrote the report. He had taken early retirement and moved to Arizona 2 weeks after he filed it. I tried to talk to the state trooper who responded first. He'd been promoted to a desk job in Lansing and wouldn't return my calls. I went to my captain. My captain told me to drop it. He didn't tell me why. He didn't have to. Rod's hands closed slowly into fists on the desk. Your grandfather knew. I'm sure he knew. But neither of us had a single piece of evidence we could take to a grand jury. And so we both went home. And I made detective sergeant the following year. And Silas Holloway sat in this trailer for the next 30 years, writing in that journal. Marin stared at the badge on the wall. Why didn't he tell me? She said quietly. When I was older, when I could understand, why didn't he reach out? Rod's expression softened. Because the moment he reached out, you became a target, he said. You were 8 years old when your father died. You were 13 when you started high school. 22 when you got married. 30 when you had Ren. At every point in your life, your grandfather was watching from a distance. And at every point, Moretti was watching him. The minute Silas acknowledged you, the family acknowledged you. He kept you safe by staying away. It cost him everything, but he did it on purpose. Marin put her hands flat on the desk to keep them from shaking. My mother lied to me for 30 years, she said. Your mother lied to you because Silas asked her to, Rod said gently. She knew the truth. She and your father talked about it the night before he drove to Ohio. She begged him not to go. He went anyway. After he died, your grandfather went to see her. He told her what had happened. He told her that the only way to keep you alive was to let you grow up believing your father had been a reckless man. She agreed, and she has carried that lie for 30 years to protect you. Marin closed her eyes. She thought of her mother Delphine, 65 years old, retired and remarried, living in a stucco bungalow in Tampa, Florida. Her mother had not been a warm woman in Marin's adult life. Her mother had been distant, brittle, careful in a way Marin had always read as cold. She had not been cold. She had been afraid. For 30 years. Marin stood up. She walked to the small window of the trailer and looked out at the rows of stacked cars. Somewhere in the eastern quadrant of the yard, a 1986 red Buick LeSabre sat with its trunk closed again, holding nothing now but rust and rain. What do we do? She said. Not a question, a statement waiting to be filled in.
Rod Bellamy did not answer right away. He turned the page of the journal and read the next entry dated July of 1995, 4 weeks after Caleb's death.
"What we do," Rod said, "is finish what your father started." He looked up. "Your grandfather built the evidence. Your father tried to deliver it. We have the journal. We have the VIN list. We have the microfilm. We have photographs, audio cassettes, account numbers. We have enough to put Vincenzo Moretti in a federal courtroom 3 times over. But we need to get it into the right hands without ending up the way your father ended up." "How?" "Carefully," Rod said, "and not alone." He pulled out his cell phone, an old flip model, not unlike the one her grandfather had left her. He scrolled through a short list of contacts. He paused on a name. "There's a journalist," he said, "Imogen Whitaker. She retired from the Detroit News 3 years ago. She covered the Moretti family for 31 years. She knows more about them than anyone outside the family. She lives in Ann Arbor now. She's 65. She's tired, but she's not done." "Will she help us?" Rod looked at the badge on the wall. "She'll help you," he said. "She and your grandfather had a standing arrangement. He sent her one anonymous tip a year for 20 years. She never knew it was him. But she'll know when she sees the journal." Marin nodded. "Call her." Rod did. The conversation was short, 23 seconds. He said the words salvage yard and Holloway and journal, and the voice on the other end went very quiet for 10 of those seconds, and then said, "Only, I'll be there in 2 hours." Imogen Whitaker arrived 98 minutes later. She drove a silver Subaru Outback with 240,000 miles on the odometer and a faded press credential still clipped to the visor. She was a tall woman, gray hair cropped short, wearing canvas pants and hiking boots and a barn coat with elbow patches. She walked into the trailer, looked at Marin, looked at Wren, looked at the badge on the wall, and her eyes filled with tears she did not bother to hide. "He was you," she said to Marin. "He was you. I never met him, and now I see him in your face." She sat down at the desk. She read the journal for 90 minutes without speaking. When she was done, she closed the cover set, both palms flat on it, and looked at Marin with the steady, ferocious focus of a woman who had spent 30 years waiting for exactly this conversation. "Your grandfather," Imogen said, "was the single best source I never had. I knew he existed. I never knew his name. He sent me 1 envelope a year, always postmarked from a different town, always typed on the same old Smith Corona, always 1 piece of usable evidence, account numbers, license plates, the name of a missing person and the date their car was destroyed. I built half my career on what he sent me, and he never asked for a thing in return. I assumed he was dead. I assumed I'd never know who he was. And now I'm sitting in his office looking at his granddaughter, and the journal he kept is 28 times more detailed than anything he ever mailed me." She tapped the cover. This is the case of the century. This is bigger than the Gotti trials. This is bigger than the mob boss tapes. This has senators in it. This has a sitting United States senator in it. Brennan, Marin said. Imogen's eyes sharpened. You read that far. I read the entry about a state representative in 1991 taking an envelope in Greektown. Harlan Brennan. He's now the senior senator from Michigan. He's the rumored vice presidential nominee for the 2028 ticket. He's the most powerful man in this state and probably the dirtiest. Your grandfather has him by the throat in 3 separate entries. Imogen took out a notebook. A real reporter's notebook, narrow and spiral bound, the kind they don't make anymore. Here's what we do, she said. We're going to need a place that's not this trailer. Moretti knows you're here. He'll come back. We're going to need to digitize everything. We're going to need to copy the microfilm. We're going to need to get statements from anyone still alive who can corroborate what's in those pages. And we're going to need to do it in less than 2 weeks. Because the moment Moretti realizes you're not selling, he is going to escalate. Marin glanced at Wren. The girl was watching the conversation with her chin resting on the arm of the leather chair. My daughter has a custody hearing on Friday, Marin said. I have 4 days. If I don't appear, I lose her. Imogen looked at her over the top of her reading glasses. Then we'll work on that too. It was decided. Rod and Imogen would coordinate. Marin would stay at the salvage yard for 1 more night to give them time to set up a safer location. Wren would stay with her mother. Tomorrow morning, they would move. Rod stayed late into the evening. He helped Marin walk the perimeter of the yard. He pointed out the blind spots in the chain-link fence. He showed her how her grandfather had rigged a series of tripwires low to the ground, connecting to small bells in the trailer. He slept light, Rod said. He slept with 1 ear open for 30 years. Marin looked at the bells. Did he ever catch anyone? Twice. Once in 2003. Once in 2011. Both times he called me before he called the police. Both times we ran them off. He never reported it. It was full dark by the time Rod left. He promised to be back by 7 in the morning with a rented box truck. Imogen had a safe house in Ann Arbor on the property of a retired federal prosecutor who owed her a favor. Marin locked the gate behind him. She walked back to the trailer through the dead cars. She could hear the wind. She could hear the rattle of a loose piece of metal somewhere 2 rows over. She could hear her own boots on the gravel and the steady, distant whoosh of traffic on the freeway. She could not hear the 3 men in the warehouse across the road, lying flat on the corrugated roof, watching her through long-lens binoculars. She found out about them at 2:17 in the morning when a small brass bell strung at the eastern fence line began to ring. Marin had been sitting at the desk reading her grandfather's journal by the light of a single lamp. Wren was asleep on the cot her mother had made up on the floor, wrapped in the wool blanket. The Smith & Wesson revolver was on the desk within arm's reach. The bell rang once, stopped, rang twice more, stopped. Then a second bell further south, Marin stood up slowly. She had spent 4 hours that afternoon walking the perimeter with Rod, noting every tripwire and where it led. The eastern line was the longest stretch, 200 yards of chain link, backed by a row of dead cars 3 deep. The southern line was shorter, but ran along the loading area where her grandfather had kept the crusher. 2 bells meant 2 intruders, coming from different angles. Marin did not panic. She had welded under pressure for 12 years. She had stood inside the hull of a cargo ship, with sparks raining down around her boots and a crane swinging steel beams past her head. She knew what to do with adrenaline. You let it sharpen you, and then you forget it is there. She crossed the trailer in 3 strides, knelt by Wren, and woke her with a hand over her mouth. "Listen to me," she whispered. "I need you to go into the bathroom. I need you to lie down in the tub. I need you to stay there until I come get you. Do not come out, no matter what you hear. Do you understand me?" Wren nodded. "I love you," Marin said. "I am going to be okay. So are you." Wren whispered, "I love you too, Mom," and climbed into the small bathroom and pulled the door shut behind her. Marin took the revolver off the desk. She put it in the back of her waistband. Then she went to the supply closet of the trailer. Her grandfather had been a salvage yard operator for 30 years. He had welding equipment in the closet that had been there since 1986. 3 full oxygen tanks, 2 acetylene tanks, a portable compressor, 15 feet of high-pressure rubber hose, a Victor cutting torch with a clean tip, and a Lincoln stick welder on a wheeled cart. Marin was a welder. She did not need a gun. She wheeled the welder out the back door of the trailer into the gravel yard. The cold November wind cut through her flannel shirt. She did not feel it. She rolled the welder behind the front-end loader her grandfather kept parked beside the trailer. She uncoiled the cable. She clamped the ground onto the steel side of the loader. She set the welder to maximum amperage. She tested the stinger by tapping a stick of 7018 rod against the dirt. A blue-white arc cracked and snapped against the gravel, throwing sparks 10 feet. She walked back to the closet. She wheeled out the oxygen tank and the acetylene tank on the welding cart. She uncoiled the hoses. She lit the cutting torch with the striker. The flame hissed and bloomed and settled into a tight blue cone. She walked the welding cart and the cutting torch out to the gate. The gate was 12 feet wide, a sliding chain-link panel on rollers secured by the padlock she had opened that morning. The padlock was new, but the gate was old. The rollers were rusted. It moved slowly. She did not need it to move. She positioned the cutting torch beside the gate. She positioned the welder 10 feet from it. She uncoiled a long, heavy-gauge welding cable across the gravel drive, ground side clamped to the gate, hot side coiled at her feet behind the front-end loader. If the men came through the gate, they would step on the cable. They would not be electrocuted. The welder was not configured for that. But the moment her boot tapped the stinger to the steel of the loader, the entire gate would become a wire saw of sparks and superheated metal. Anyone touching it would let go very, very fast. She crouched behind the loader. She listened. Boots on gravel to the east, coming around the back of the trailer. Then more boots, further south, coming up the fence line. 3 men. She had counted 3. She drew the revolver from her waistband. She set it on the gravel beside her right hand. She gripped the welding stinger with her left. The first man came around the corner of the trailer. He was tall, heavy-set. He carried a flashlight in one hand and what looked like a tire iron in the other. He moved like a man who had done this before. He swept the flashlight across the gravel, across the front-end loader, across the trailer's front door. He did not see her behind the loader. He walked to the trailer door. He tried the handle. It was locked. He stepped back, gestured with the flashlight, and a second man came around the southern fence line and joined him. The second man was smaller, wiry. He carried a crowbar. They worked the door together. The smaller man wedged the crowbar between the door and the frame. The taller man leaned into it. The frame splintered. The door popped open. They went inside. Maren waited. She could hear them moving in the trailer. Boots on the linoleum. A drawer being yanked open. A chair being knocked over. The smaller one called out something muffled. The taller one answered. She waited for them to come back out. She also waited for the third man. He came around the southern fence line 30 seconds later. He was older than the other 2, maybe 45. He carried no weapon Maren could see, but he moved like a man who didn't need one. He stopped at the open trailer door. He looked inside. He spoke low and clipped. "It's empty. She moved them." The other 2 came out. "The kid was here," the smaller one said. "Cot's still warm. They're in the yard." The older one turned to scan the rows of stacked cars. He turned, and his eyes passed across the front-end loader, and he saw the welding cable on the gravel drive, and his expression changed. He started to open his mouth. Maren tapped the welding stinger to the steel side of the loader. The arc that ripped through the welding cable across the gravel drive was a sound like the sky tearing open. 12 feet of chain-link gate became for 1.5 seconds a curtain of white-hot sparks and exploding paint and ozone. The padlock glowed cherry red and dropped from its hasp. The smell of vaporized metal filled the yard. The 3 men flinched backward. The older one fell on his back. The smaller one dropped his crowbar. Maren stood up from behind the loader. She had the revolver in her right hand. She had the cutting torch in her left blue flame hissing at full pressure. "Get out," she said. Her voice was calm, steady. The voice of a woman who had welded for 12 years and had been afraid to her bones for 12 hours and had decided sometime in the last 60 seconds that the fear was a tool like any other tool and you used it or it used you. The older man on his back looked at her. He looked at the revolver. He looked at the cutting torch. He looked at the still, sparking remains of the welding gate. He looked back at her. "Lady," he said quietly, "you got no idea what you just did." "Get out," Marin said again. They got out. The tall one helped the older one to his feet. The smaller one grabbed the crowbar. They retreated through the smoking remains of the gate into the dark. Marin heard a vehicle start somewhere up the road. Heard it pull away. Heard it disappear into the freeway noise. She stood in the gravel with the cutting torch hissing in her hand for a full minute. Then she shut it off. She set it down. She holstered the revolver. She walked back to the trailer, found Wren still in the bathtub, lifted her out, and held her against her chest for a long, long time. "It's okay, baby," Marin whispered into her daughter's hair. "It's okay. They're gone." Rod Bellamy arrived at 4:11 in the morning, having driven from his apartment in Royal Oak, with one hand on the wheel and the other holding his phone open to a call with the Ann Arbor police chief, an old friend who happened to be a man whose loyalty Moretti had never been able to buy. By 5:30, the salvage yard had been declared a federal crime scene, sealed and posted with Ann Arbor PD on the perimeter, and not a single Detroit cop within 3 miles. By 7 o'clock, Marin and Wren were in the back of Rod's Buick heading west. Imogen Whitaker met them at a converted farmhouse on a private 10-acre lot outside Ann Arbor. The property belonged to a retired federal prosecutor named Bernard Wall, who was 81 years old, walked with a cane, drank his coffee black, and had spent the last 6 months of his career trying to indict Vincenzo Moretti on a RICO charge. He had failed. He still kept the case file in a footlocker in his basement. "I have waited 40 years for somebody to walk into my house with what is in that bag," Bernard said when Marin set the canvas tool bag on his kitchen table. 40 years. He poured everyone coffee. The 4 of them, Marin, Rod, Imogen, and Bernard, sat at the kitchen table while Wren ate cereal at the counter, and they made a plan. It would take 8 days. 8 days to digitize the journal. 8 days to copy the microfilm. 8 days to identify and reach out to 5 surviving witnesses still alive and willing to talk. 8 days to coordinate simultaneous publication across 5 major newspapers. 8 days to upload encrypted backups to 3 offshore servers. 8 days to prepare a federal indictment package that Bernard would personally hand-deliver to a contact at the Department of Justice the morning of publication. 8 days. Friday's custody hearing was 4 days away. Marin told Bernard about it. Bernard called a family court attorney he knew in Cleveland. The attorney listened for 10 minutes. He called back 20 minutes later. "I can get you a continuance," he said. 2 weeks. I'll cite documented threats against your daughter. I'll file under seal. Judge Whitmore will grant it. You won't lose her. But you have to actually be in court on the new date, Miss Holloway. You have to be alive and in court. "I understand," Marin said. She hung up the phone. She sat at Bernard's kitchen table and watched her daughter eating cereal. And she thought about being alive on a date in early December, 2 weeks from now. And she thought about what would have to happen between this morning and that date for both of those things to be true. The work began. Day 1 was scanning. Imogen had brought a portable high-resolution scanner. She and Marin scanned the journal page by page into encrypted PDF files with backup copies sent to 2 cloud services and 1 physical drive that Bernard locked in a fireproof safe in his study. Day 2 was microfilm. Bernard had a microfilm reader in his basement left over from his prosecutor years. They spent 14 hours reading and photographing the rolls. The microfilm contained bank statements, wire transfer records, account holder names. The breadth of it was staggering. $3,800,000,000 in laundered funds, traceable, dated, signed. Day 3 was the audio cassettes. Rod had borrowed a cassette deck from a friend who collected vintage audio equipment. They digitized the tapes. The voices on the tapes included Vincenzo Moretti, 2 of his lieutenants, and on one tape, dated April 14th, 1992, Senator Harlan Brennan, accepting a delivery of $120,000 in exchange for what the recording made clear was a vote in the state legislature. On day 4, Marin's mother called. Marin had not spoken to her mother in 3 weeks. She had not told her mother about the salvage yard, the journal, the threats. She had not somehow been able to. Now, sitting on Bernard Wall's back porch in the cold afternoon sun with Wren reading inside and the others working in the basement, Marin took her mother's call. "Marin," her mother said, "where are you?" Her mother's voice was thin, strained, the voice of a woman who had been awake all night. "Mom," Marin said, "I need to ask you something." There was a long, long silence on the other end of the line. "Ask," her mother said finally. "Did Dad die in an accident?" The silence stretched. It stretched so long that Marin could hear her mother breathing, could hear the soft sound of her mother's hand pressing against her own face on the other end of the line, could hear the small, broken sound of a sob being held in. "No," her mother said. "He didn't." Marin closed her eyes. "I'm sorry," her mother whispered. "I'm so sorry. I have wanted to tell you for 30 years. Your grandfather made me promise. He said the only way to keep you safe was to keep you ignorant. I promised, and then I kept promising. And then it became the only story I knew how to tell. Marin, please, please forgive me." Marin could not speak for a moment. "I forgive you, Mom," she said finally. "I forgive you. I need you to come to Michigan. I need you to come tomorrow. There are things I have to tell you. There are things Dad would want me to tell you. And there is a granddaughter you have never really gotten to know. And we are about to do something that might cost me my life. And if it does, I want you to have her. And I want you to tell her the truth."
Her mother was crying.
"I'll be there tomorrow," her mother said. "Marin, listen to me. Your father loved you more than anything in the world. He died trying to make a world that would be safe for you. Do you understand?" "I understand, Mom." "Whatever you are about to do, your father would be so proud." Marin ended the call. She sat on the porch for a long time, watching the last of the afternoon light fade through the bare maple trees. Day 5 was a Tuesday. Marin's mother arrived at noon. Delphine Holloway was 65 years old, small, gray-haired, wearing a navy cardigan and sensible shoes. When she walked into Bernard Wall's farmhouse and saw her granddaughter for the first time in 18 months, she dropped her purse on the floor and walked across the kitchen and held the 11-year-old girl for almost a full minute without speaking. Then she turned to Marin, and Marin walked into her mother's arms the way she had not walked into them since she was a child. Day 6. Day 7. The work continued. On the evening of Day 7, Imogen received word from the editors at the 5 newspapers. Everything was ready. The Washington Post would lead with the senator. The New York Times would lead with the senator and the murder. The Detroit News and Detroit Free Press would lead with the local angle, the cop's son, the buried evidence, the 30-year secret. The Chicago Tribune would lead with the financial side, the $3.8 billion. Bernard Wall had spent the day in Washington. He returned that night with 2 senior officials from the FBI's Public Integrity Section who had been read into the file under terms of strict confidentiality. The Bureau would coordinate arrests at 9:30 in the morning, 90 minutes after publication. Publication was set for 9 a.m. Eastern the following morning. That night, Marin sat alone in Bernard's study. The door closed, the lamp low. The leather journal was open on her lap, turned to a page she had not yet read. The last page. Her grandfather's final entry was dated 3 weeks before his death. "To my granddaughter, Marin," it began. "If you are reading this, you have found the safe, you have read the journal, and you have decided not to take Vincenzo Moretti's money. I am writing this entry from the hospice room, where I will die. The morphine is good. The pain is far away. I want you to know 3 things. 1. I am sorry. I am sorry for 30 years of silence. I am sorry I could not be your grandfather in any way that mattered. I am sorry I let your father go to Ohio that day. I am sorry for everything I owed your father that I will now owe to you instead. 2. You are not finishing my work. You are finishing your father's work. I only kept it safe. He was the one who would have carried it. He had the courage of a man twice his age. He looked me in the eye and told me he could not raise his daughter in a country where men like Moretti walked free. He was right. He has always been right. 3. Ren is going to be okay. I have watched her from a distance for 11 years the way I watched you. I have her school photo from kindergarten. I have her class picture from 3rd grade.
I asked your mother to send them, and she did. Ren is going to be okay because she has you, and you have your father in you, and your father had me in him. And somewhere down the line, there is a Holloway who refused to let evil win. Today, that Holloway is you.
Be brave, granddaughter. The work is hard. The work is worth it. All my love. Your grandfather, Silas. Marin closed the journal. She sat in the dim lamplight for a long time. Then she stood up. She put the journal in the fireproof safe. She walked out of the study down the hall to the small guest bedroom where her daughter and her mother were sleeping. In twin beds side by side, breathing in the same slow rhythm. She stood in the doorway, her mother, her daughter. 3 generations of Holloway women in one small, quiet room. Marin stood there until the dawn began to gray the windows. Then she turned, walked to the kitchen, poured a cup of black coffee, and waited for 9 o'clock in the morning. 9 o'clock came the way a tide comes in. Marin stood in Bernard Wall's kitchen holding a cup of black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, watching the second hand on the wall clock sweep through the last full minute of her old life. Rod Bellamy was on her left, standing very still, the way old cops stand when they are waiting for something they cannot stop. Imogen Whitaker was on her right, a laptop open on the kitchen table in front of her 5 browser tabs queued and ready. Bernard Wall sat at the head of the table with a phone in each hand, one connected to the FBI Public Integrity Section, one connected to the United States Attorney's Office in Detroit. In the living room, Delphine sat on the couch with Ren tucked against her side. The girl had not asked what was going to happen at 9 o'clock. The girl had only asked the night before whether her mother was going to be famous after this, and Marin had said she did not know, and Ren had said quietly, "I hope not. I just want to go home with you." The clock struck 9. Imogen tapped the keyboard. In the same instant, 240 miles south in Washington, the Washington Post's homepage refreshed with a headline that ran 4 columns wide. 350 miles east, the New York Times pushed a breaking news alert to 48 million subscribers. In Detroit, the news and the Free Press updated their front pages within the same 60-second window. In Chicago, the Tribune published the financial breakdown that traced $3.8 billion through 22 shell companies across 4 offshore jurisdictions. The headlines varied. The byline was the same. By Imogen Whitaker, with reporting from Rod Bellamy, retired Detroit Police Department, and Bernard Wall, former United States Attorney. Marin's name was not in the byline. Marin had insisted. The story was not hers to take credit for. The story belonged to a Detroit cop who had spent 30 years writing in a journal in a salvage yard, and to a 32-year-old man who had died on an Ohio highway in 1995, trying to bring it to the light. By 9:03, the story was trending on every major social media platform in the country. By 9:07, the Senate Majority Leader's office issued a statement saying it was reviewing the allegations. By 9:11, Bernard's phone rang. The FBI was moving. A federal arrestee team was already at the gate of Vincenzo Moretti's estate in Grosse Pointe. A second team was rolling on a residence in Bloomfield Hills belonging to Salvatore Moretti. A third was en route to a private airstrip in Pontiac, where Bruno Moretti was rumored to be preparing a flight to a country that did not have an extradition treaty. By 9:24, the first arrest hit the news wires. Vincenzo Moretti, 85 years old, was taken into federal custody on the front porch of his estate. He was wearing a silk robe over silk pajamas. He did not resist. He asked the lead agent for a moment to retrieve his medication. The agent allowed it. Moretti returned with a bottle of nitroglycerin and a brown leather Bible. He was photographed by a Free Press reporter who had been tipped off and was waiting at the end of the driveway. The photograph would run the next morning on the front page of every paper in the country. By 9:38, Senator Harlan Brennan released a statement. The statement was 3 sentences. He denied wrongdoing. He announced his immediate resignation from the United States Senate effective at the close of business that day. He withdrew his name from consideration for the 2028 Democratic vice presidential nomination. The Detroit field office of the FBI confirmed at 9:52 that 23 federal arrest warrants were being executed across 4 states. By the end of the day, the number would be 29. By the end of the week, it would be 41. The Treasury Department froze $3,800,000,000 in offshore accounts before lunch. Marin watched all of it on the kitchen counter laptop with Rod Bellamy's hand on her shoulder, and her mother's hand on her other shoulder, and her daughter standing in the kitchen doorway in a pair of pajama pants and a sweatshirt, watching her mother watch the world rearrange itself in real time. At 10:14, Imogen's phone rang. It was the producer of a morning news program on a national cable network. They had cleared a 15-minute live segment for 11:30 a.m. Eastern. They wanted Marin. They were sending a car. Marin shook her head. She did not want a car. She wanted to do it from where she was on a laptop with her family in the room with the leather journal of her grandfather, Silas Holloway, open on the table beside her, and with the Detroit Police Department badge number 4471 set on the table beside the journal. Imogen made the call. The producer agreed. At 11:30, the cable network went to a live segment, and 41 million Americans saw the face of Marin Holloway for the first time. She did not look like a celebrity. She did not look like a politician. She looked like a 38-year-old welder from Cleveland, Ohio, sitting in the kitchen of a retired federal prosecutor's farmhouse outside Ann Arbor, wearing a clean flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hair pulled back in a low ponytail, a thin scar visible across the back of her right wrist, where a grinding wheel had kicked back at her in 2017. The anchor introduced her. The anchor said her name and her age and her trade. The anchor said the words, granddaughter of the witness and daughter of the murdered son. And Marin listened to her own life summarized in 15 seconds and felt nothing at all. Then the anchor turned to her and asked her the first question. Miss Holloway, this morning, with the help of a retired police officer, a retired journalist, and a retired federal prosecutor, you brought to public attention what is being called the largest documented organized crime case in American history. A sitting United States senator has resigned. A reputed crime boss is in federal custody. The Treasury Department has frozen nearly $4 billion in laundered assets. Can you tell our audience in your own words why you decided to come forward?
Maren was quiet for a long moment. She had thought the night before that she might prepare what she was going to say. She had thought she might write down the right words, but she had not been able to. Every time she had tried, the words had come out wrong, too polished, too written. So she had decided to say nothing in advance and trust herself to speak when the moment came. The moment was here. She looked at the small camera mounted on the laptop. She thought about her father. She thought about the tripwire bells at the salvage yard. She thought about the brass key in the certified envelope. She thought about her daughter, 11 years old, standing in the kitchen doorway, watching her mother on a small screen 4 feet away. She picked up the brass badge from the table. She held it where the camera could see it.
"This belonged to my grandfather," Maren said. "Silas Joseph Holloway. He served the Detroit Police Department for 21 years. He retired in 1989. The people I helped bring to justice this morning forced him by threatening his unborn granddaughter to participate in their criminal enterprise for 30 years. He participated, and he documented. He kept a record of every license plate, every name, every dollar, in a leather-bound journal that he hid in the trunk of a 1986 Buick LeSabre in the back corner of his salvage yard." She set the badge down. She picked up the journal. "In 1995, my father Caleb Holloway found this evidence. He decided to take it to the FBI. He was 32 years old. He had a wife and a 7-year-old daughter, who was me. The day before he was scheduled to meet with federal agents in Cleveland, his car exploded on Interstate 94 outside Toledo. The official report said his gas tank ruptured. The official report was a lie." The studio was silent. The anchor did not interrupt. "My grandfather spent the next 30 years protecting this evidence, protecting me, protecting my mother. He never reached out to me. He never sent me a birthday card. He never came to my high school graduation. He never met my daughter. He stayed away from us deliberately for 30 years because he knew the moment he acknowledged us as family, the people he was documenting would acknowledge us as targets. He died alone in a hospice in Detroit in October of this year. He left me everything he had: a salvage yard, a journal, a revolver, a list of names, and a chance to finish what my father started." Maren set the journal down. "I am not a hero. I am not brave. I am a welder. I have a daughter. I was about to lose her in a custody hearing because I could not afford a place to live. The most powerful organized crime family in the state of Michigan offered me $750,000 to walk away from this evidence and never speak of it. The amount of money I had in my checking account at the time of that offer was $19. I want to be very clear on national television that I considered the offer. I considered it for an entire night. I sat in a trailer in a salvage yard in the dark, and I tried to talk myself into taking the money. I have an 11-year-old daughter. I would do anything to keep her safe. She paused. She looked for a moment off camera at where Rin was standing. I did not take the money, she said, because of my daughter. I did not take the money because there is a moment in every parent's life when their child looks at them and says something so simple and so true that it changes who you are. On the drive from Cleveland to Detroit, my daughter told me she did not need a swimming pool. She said she just needed me. And I realized, sitting in my grandfather's trailer that night, that the version of me she needed was not the one who took $750,000 from a murderer to keep him quiet. The version of me she needed was the one who finished what her grandfather started.
Marin paused. I am here today because my grandfather was a police sergeant who could not stop being a police sergeant even when they made him a criminal. I am here today because my father was a young man who looked at his infant daughter and decided he would not let her grow up in a country where the men who threatened her could not be touched. I am here today because 3 generations of Holloways spent 30 years writing one true sentence. And today, at 9 o'clock in the morning,
that sentence was finally read aloud. She looked at the camera. To the families of the 47 people whose names are in that journal, the ones who disappeared between 1985 and 2015. I want to say only this. Your father, your mother, your brother, your sister, your child, your friend was not forgotten. A man in a salvage yard wrote their names down. He wrote them down every time. He waited 30 years for someone to read them. Today, the country is reading them. I am so sorry it took this long. She stopped.
The anchor did not speak for 3 full seconds. Then he cleared his throat. Miss Holloway, thank you. We will be right back. The segment cut to commercial.
Marin closed the laptop. She put her face in her hands and shook for 90 seconds. Her mother came around the table and held her without speaking. Rin came in from the doorway and crawled onto her mother's lap and put her small arms around her mother's neck, and Marin held her daughter and her mother at the same time. And Rod Bellamy looked away, because some moments are not for old detectives to witness. And Imogen Whitaker quietly closed the laptop and walked outside onto the porch and lit her first cigarette in 14 years. At 12:46 p.m., Marin's flip phone rang. Not the one her grandfather had left her, her own. It was the family court attorney in Cleveland. Miss Holloway, he said. Trevor Ashcroft's attorney just called my office. Trevor is withdrawing his petition for full custody, effective immediately. He is willing to keep the existing joint custody arrangement with primary physical custody to you.
He requested I tell you something else, and I am going to relay it word for word, even though I would advise against responding. Tell me.
He said his stepdaughter, who is 9 years old, was watching the cable broadcast with him this morning. He said, when you held up the badge, his stepdaughter turned to him and asked, and I am quoting, "Why are you trying to take Ren away from a mom like that?" He said he did not have an answer. He said he is sorry. He said he will not contest the existing arrangement again. Marin closed her eyes. "Thank you," she said.
There will be paperwork. There will be a brief hearing to formalize the withdrawal. But Miss Holloway, you have your daughter. You are not going to lose her. It is over.
She ended the call. She did not cry. She had cried enough that morning. She walked across the kitchen and she lifted her daughter into her arms, and she carried her into the living room, and she sat down on Bernard Wall's old leather couch with Ren in her lap, and she pressed her face into her daughter's hair, and she breathed in the cheap cherry shampoo, and she let herself, for the first time in 8 months, feel something close to peace. The world, of course, did not stop. For the next 6 weeks, Marin Holloway's name was in every newspaper in the country. She did 3 more interviews and declined 70. She testified before a federal grand jury in Detroit on a Thursday in mid-December. She testified before a Senate Ethics Subcommittee in Washington on a Tuesday in late January. She wore the same charcoal gray blazer to both appearances because she only owned one blazer, and she refused on principle to buy a second. Vincenzo Moretti was indicted on 41 federal counts, including 7 counts of murder, 22 counts of racketeering, and 12 counts of money laundering. His attorneys argued for bail. The judge denied it. Moretti remained in federal custody at the Milan Correctional Facility in Michigan, where he was kept on the medical unit because of his heart condition. He would not live to see trial. He died of congestive heart failure on the 17th of February, 6 weeks and 4 days after his arrest. He was 85 years old. His obituary in the Free Press ran 9 paragraphs. 7 of them were about his crimes. Salvatore Moretti, 68, took a plea deal in March. 25 years in federal prison. He named 7 additional co-conspirators in exchange for the deal. 3 of them were currently sitting state senators. 2 were sitting federal judges. Senator Harlan Brennan was indicted in early April. He pled guilty in June to a single count of conspiracy to commit honest services fraud. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. He served his sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution in Morgantown, West Virginia. He was 61 years old. The career he had spent 40 years building was finished in 19 weeks. The Treasury Department recovered $3,240 million of the original $3,800 million. A federal court designated the remainder as recovered assets to be distributed over a 5-year period to the families of the 47 identified victims listed in Silas Holloway's journal, and to a victims' compensation fund administered by the state of Michigan. Marin Holloway did not accept any of the money. She was offered formally a whistleblower's award of $38 million under the Federal Asset Forfeiture Program. She declined it. She asked in writing that the money be added to the Victims' Compensation Fund. The Treasury Department obliged. The story of the welder who turned down $38 million ran for 2 news cycles. Marin did not give interviews about it. What she did do in March was start a small foundation. She named it the Caleb Holloway Foundation after her father. Its purpose was specific. It funded legal services and temporary housing for working parents facing custody disputes brought on by job loss. Its annual operating budget was $300,000, raised entirely from small private donations. It served the metropolitan Cleveland area. Its board consisted of 3 people: Marin Holloway, Delphine Holloway, Roderick Bellamy. In its first year, it would help 78 families. In the summer of 2026, Marin returned to Detroit. She brought Wren. She brought Delphine. She brought Rod Bellamy and Imogen Whitaker. She brought a small delegation of family members of the 47 identified victims. 61 people in total gathered on a Saturday morning at the eastern edge of Detroit, at a property that had once been a salvage yard. Marin had not sold the land. She had instead spent the spring working with an architect, a landscape designer, and the City of Detroit's Parks Department. The dead cars had been removed. The chain-link fence had come down. The trailer had been preserved exactly as it was and converted into a small one-room museum. The crusher had been hauled away. The 4 acres had been replanted with native grasses and wild flowers, and a walking path of crushed limestone had been laid in a long, slow curve from one end of the property to the other. At the far end of the path was a monument, a single black granite wall, 22 feet long, 6 feet tall, polished to a mirror finish. On the wall, etched in white, were 50 names. 47 were the men and women whose vehicles Silas Holloway had documented between 1985 and 2015. The other 3 names were Silas Holloway, Caleb Holloway, and Eugene Bellamy, who had disappeared in 1989 and whose older brother had spent 36 years waiting for this morning. Above the names etched in larger letters was a single line. They were not forgotten. The ceremony was small. There were no politicians. There were no television cameras. Marin had refused them all. There were 61 folding chairs set up in the grass before the monument, and a small podium with a microphone and a pitcher of ice water on a side table. Rod Bellamy spoke first. He stood at the podium in a brown suit he had not worn since his daughter's wedding in 2003, and he held a single piece of folded notebook paper in his hand, and he did not unfold it. He looked out at the families. He looked at his brother's name on the wall behind him. He breathed in slowly. "Silas Holloway," Rod said, "told me one time that being a police officer was the second hardest job in the world. I asked him what the first hardest was. He said, being the witness nobody knows you are. He said being a witness to evil alone for years with no one to share it with, no one to tell, no one to remember alongside you, was the loneliest work a man could do. I thought he was being dramatic. I was younger then. I did not know yet what he meant. He paused. He looked at the names on the wall. He carried this alone for 30 years. He carried the names on this wall in a leather-bound notebook in the trunk of a Buick LeSabre because he did not trust anyone anywhere to carry them with him. He could not. Every person he might have trusted was either bought or scared or already dead. So he carried it alone. He carried it until the day he died, and on that day he left it to his granddaughter and his granddaughter, who is standing in the front row right now. Picked it up and carried it the rest of the way. Rod stopped. He looked down. He took a slow breath. He looked back up. My brother Eugene was 26 years old when he disappeared. He worked at a transmission shop on the east side. He was supposed to come to my house for Thanksgiving in 1989. He never showed up. I spent 36 years not knowing what happened to him. I spent 36 years walking past his name on missing persons flyers I had stapled to telephone poles myself. I spent 36 years asking every retired cop I knew if they had heard anything. Today, I know. Today, I know where he ended his life. Today, his name is on a wall in the sunlight in a city that finally remembered him. I do not have words for what that is. I do not think there are words for what that is. But I have for the first time in 36 years a place to come and sit with my brother. And I have it because of a 32-year-old man named Caleb Holloway, who I never met, and a 38-year-old woman named Marin Holloway, who I will know for the rest of my life. He stepped back from the podium. He nodded once to Marin. He sat down. Marin spoke last. She walked to the podium with the leather journal in her hand and the brass badge in her pocket. She did not have notes. She set the journal on the podium. She looked at the families. She found in the third row an older man holding the hand of a woman who must have been his sister. She had been told that morning that they were the surviving brother and sister of a young woman whose name appeared in the journal in an entry dated August of 1991. The young woman had been their middle sister. She had been 24. She had worked at a bank. She had been about to be married. She had seen something at the bank she should not have seen. Marin met the older brother's eyes. He nodded at her. My grandfather wrote in this journal every day for 30 years, Marin said. I have read it 3 times now. I will read it again. There is something in it I did not see the first 2 times, and I want to share it with you today because I think it belongs to all of us, not to me. She opened the journal to a page near the middle. The entry was dated January of 2002. She read aloud. Today is my 62nd birthday. My granddaughter Marin is 14 years old. She lives in Cleveland with her mother. She does not know I exist. She does not know her father was murdered. She does not know that I keep a picture of her age 8 on the table beside my bed. She does not know that I look at the picture every morning before I read the paper. She does not know that I have promised myself I will live long enough to give her the truth. I have promised myself I will outlast Vincenzo Moretti. I do not know if I can. He is in good health. I am developing a cough, but I have promised. And I am a Detroit police officer even now, even after all of this, and Detroit police officers keep their promises. Maren closed the journal. My grandfather kept his promise, she said. He outlasted Vincenzo Moretti by exactly 4 months. He died not knowing whether I would do what he hoped I would do. He died trusting me anyway. She paused. I want to say something to my daughter. Wren in the front row sat up straighter. Wren, Maren said. There is a thing your great-grandfather wrote in this journal on a page near the end that I did not read to you because I wanted to save it for today. He wrote near the end that he had been watching you grow up from a distance. He wrote that he had your school pictures. He wrote that he loved you. He wrote that he hoped one day you would understand why he could not love you closer. Wren's eyes filled with tears. She did not wipe them away. I want you to know, Maren said, that the reason we are standing here today is because on the drive from Cleveland to Detroit 8 months ago, you told me that you did not need a swimming pool. You said you just needed me. I want you to know that everything that has happened since you said that, every brave thing I have done, every right thing I have done, every difficult thing I have done, was done because an 11-year-old girl with her grandmother's stubborn jaw told her mother the truth in the cab of a Ford pickup truck on Interstate 90, somewhere east of Toledo. Maren stopped. She had to. She gathered herself. You are the reason, she said. You are the reason the names are on this wall. You are the reason Vincenzo Moretti died in a federal jail cell instead of a beachfront villa. You are the reason a United States senator is in federal prison. You are the reason my grandfather's 30-year vigil meant something instead of nothing. You did not pick up the journal. You did not drive to Detroit. You did not stand in front of 3 armed men in a junkyard with a welding torch in your hand. But you told your mother on a rainy afternoon in November that all you needed was her, and you made her for the first time in her adult life want to deserve that. Everything else followed from that sentence, Wren. Everything else. Wren was crying openly. Delphine had her arm around her granddaughter and was crying too. Rod Bellamy was looking at the ground, and his shoulders were shaking just barely. Maren stepped back from the podium. She walked down to the front row. She picked up her daughter. She carried her 11 years old and getting too big to be carried up to the granite wall. She lifted Wren so that the girl's face was level with the etched name of Caleb Holloway. This is your grandfather, Maren said quietly. This is the man you are named after partly.
Your middle name is Caleb. I have never told you why. I am going to tell you now, and I am going to tell you every year on your birthday for as long as I live. Your grandfather was a 32-year-old man who looked at his baby daughter, who was me, and decided he would not let evil win. He drove to Ohio in 1995 to bring evidence to the FBI. He never made it, but he tried, and his trying
30 years later became your mother's trying. And your mother's trying someday will become your trying. And the Holloway women granddaughter will keep trying, because that is what we do. She set Wren down. Wren placed her small hand flat against her grandfather's name, and she held it there for a long time. And the late June wind moved across the wild flowers, and somewhere overhead, a hawk was circling on a thermal in the warm Michigan sky. After the ceremony, Marin walked the property alone for a while. She walked the long curve of the limestone path. She walked past the converted trailer, which now held the leather journal in a glass case. The brass badge number 4471 in another, and a series of photographs along one wall, including one of Caleb Holloway holding his 5-year-old daughter on the porch of an apartment building in Cleveland in 1992. She walked to the back corner of the property, where the red 1986 Buick LeSabre still sat preserved. Because she had not been able to bring herself to scrap it, she put her hand on the trunk. She thought about her grandfather, alone opening this trunk 3 or 4 times a year for 30 years, adding pages to a journal, adding rolls of microfilm to a safe, adding names to a list that he had no guarantee anyone would ever read. She thought about her father, 28 years old, sitting in the trailer with him in May of 1995, telling him he was going to the FBI. She thought about her own daughter, sitting now in Delphine's lap, 50 yards away, in front of a wall of 50 names, eating a piece of fruit from the small reception table. She thought about the 3 generations of Holloway women who had carried each other one to the next through 30 years of lies and 1 year of truth. She bowed her head against the cold metal of the trunk. "Thank you, Grandpa," she said quietly. "We finished it." The wind moved through the wildflowers. She walked back to her family. In the autumn of that year, Wren Holloway, 12 years old, returned to school in Cleveland. She made the honor roll for the first quarter, as she always did. She told her 6th grade English teacher in a personal essay assigned the second week of October that she planned to become a federal prosecutor when she grew up. The teacher wrote in red ink at the top of the paper an A+ and a note that read, "I hope you do, Wren. The country will be lucky to have you." Wren brought the essay home. She put it on the refrigerator with a magnet. Marin read it 3 times that night after Wren was in bed. She left it on the refrigerator. She left it there for the rest of the school year. She never took it down. The salvage yard, now a memorial park, opened to the public in October of 2026. Admission was free. It received 48,000 visitors in its first year. The trailer museum was staffed by volunteers. Most of them were retired Detroit police officers. One of them on Saturdays was a 70-year-old man with watery eyes and carefully polished shoes, who answered questions from visitors about the man whose name was on the wall, whose brother's name was also on the wall, whose granddaughter had finished what he started. Rod Bellamy lived another 9 years. He never remarried. He visited the park every Saturday until the week before he died. His ashes were scattered at his request in the wildflower field behind the granite wall, beside the dead cars that no longer existed beneath the open sky of a city that had finally, after almost 40 years, been able to bury its own. Delphine Holloway moved from Tampa back to Cleveland in the spring of 2027 to be closer to her daughter and granddaughter. She lived in a small apartment 3 blocks from Marin and Wren. She took Wren to school in the mornings. She kept a photograph of Caleb Holloway on her bedside table. The photograph showed her son, 25 years old, holding his infant daughter against his chest. On a winter afternoon, smiling at the camera, eyes crinkled. The future spread out in front of him like a road he believed with the whole of his young heart that he could walk. She kept the photograph until the day she died in the autumn of 2034, at the age of 73. Marin held her hand in the hospital room. Wren, then 19 years old, and in her first year at the University of Michigan, sat on the other side of the bed and read aloud from a book of poems Delphine had loved as a young woman. Delphine died peacefully in her sleep at 3:14 in the morning, with both of her girls beside her. Marin Holloway lived a long life. She kept welding. She returned to the trade in 2027 after the worst of the publicity had faded. She opened a small fabrication shop on the west side of Cleveland named Holloway Iron Works, and she employed by 2035 11 other welders, 4 of whom were women. She paid her people well. She never took on military contracts. She never sold the company. She did not remarry. She did not, in the end, want to. She had what she had wanted. She had her daughter, who grew up to be a federal prosecutor in the Eastern District of Michigan, working out of the same federal building where her mother had once testified before a grand jury. She had her mother until she didn't. She had her grandfather's brass badge number, 4471, which she kept on her own bedside table for the rest of her life, polished in the center, where she touched it every morning before she read the paper. She had a wall of 50 names in a memorial park outside Detroit, where she walked twice a year on her father's birthday in February, and on her grandfather's birthday in July. Alone in the wildflowers, with the wind in her face and her family around her, in the only way she had ever needed them. She had the leather journal. She kept it in a small fireproof safe in the closet of her bedroom. She read it once a year on the first cold morning of November, when she could not sleep, when the wind reminded her of a Detroit dawn breaking over a salvage yard in 2025. She read the last entry every time. The last entry was the one her grandfather had written 3 weeks before he died. Be brave, granddaughter. The work is hard. The work is worth it.
Marin Holloway, in the years that remained to her, was brave.
The work was hard. The work was worth it. And somewhere in a quiet place beyond the wildflower field, a 32-year-old man stood beside a man in a Detroit police uniform, watching his daughter and his granddaughter walk a limestone path on a summer afternoon. And the older man put his hand on the younger man's shoulder and said only, "She did it, son. She did it." And the younger man nodded, and he smiled, and the wind moved across the wildflowers, and the names on the wall stayed in the sunlight. And the long, long silence was finally over.